Today, let's discuss software engineering at Google lessons learned. We will dive into the first law, which is Hiram's law. With a sufficient number of users of an API, it doesn't matter what you promise in the contract. All observable behaviors of your system will be depended on by somebody. So what does it mean? Essentially, it means that as your users grow, the implicit rules also starts to grow. And you can imagine if you had, say, 10 users and your API would respond 1 second each time. But with 1,000 users or 1,000,000 users, that 1 second people start to expect starts to also break. You can't deliver 1 second API response with 1,000,000 users without making significant changes. And so there are a lot of implicit rules in your API that starts to break as your users scale. And so this is something Hiram wanted you to be aware of. For example, availability is also one of them. When you had a couple of users, it was much easier to keep your application up and running 24/7. But with millions of users, you have to scale more infrastructure, more concurrent access. And so this is something that you have to be wary of as your users scale. Let's dive into the next one, Beyonce's rule. If you like it, put a CI test on it. Essentially, what it means is if you want your code to stay the next day or the next week in the monorepo of Google, you had to put a CI test on it. You can imagine there are thousands of engineers all constantly working on one monorepo in Google, and there are all different changes that comes into the main repository. So it could be refactoring changes, bug fixes, feature changes, migration changes. And so the general rule was, if you wanted your code to stay, put a CI test on it. That way it would prevent someone from actually removing that logic or removing that core functionality that you built. Second, let's talk about Chesterton's fence. Essentially, it's a practice of second order thinking. And it originated from a story where a reformist would see a fence out of nowhere. And if you think about it, fence don't sprout out from the ground themselves. Essentially, someone had put some thought into it and decided that it was best to put that fence there. Put very simply, don't destroy what you don't understand. Was it because to keep out the wolves? Was it to keep out trespassers? And if you haphazardly remove something that you don't understand, it becomes something that you regret much later on. Chesterton's fence acts as a cautionary tales for more junior engineers who do not understand some code bases and just changes them without thinking what the consequences are. What is the bus factor? The bus factor is the minimum number of team members that have to suddenly disappear from a project before the project stalls due to lack of knowledgeable or competent personnel. Essentially, the expression is hit by a bus, describes a person either dying or, more generally speaking, suddenly disappearing from the project. Larger numbers are more preferable as a bus factor rather than a small number. So a bus factor of 1 essentially means one person needs to be in an accident before the company stalls or the project dies out. The final one is the core character principles that Google usually looks for, and it's humility, trust, and respect. Humility to understand there are others much better than you, that you can learn from them. So having that open mindset, trusting in your teammates that they know what they're doing, that everyone else is competent like you. And finally, respect. So treating each other with respect, regardless of what position they're in. So those are the 3 main core character principles at Google. Thank you very much.